we really have a super big ambition. What we want to do is make sure that our company is seen as the best employer of choice for the best talent out there. And that talent is diverse.
Suits and Sneakers Leadership Edition. Ein Deininger-Podcast für Entscheiderinnen und Entscheider. Mit Joy Edwin Thanarajah und Harald Fortmann.
Did you know that employees with a migration background in Germany report 24% fewer promotions and earn 25% less than their peers? Or that women in Germany still face an 18% pay gap, while women in India earn on average 60% less than men? These numbers highlight a stark reality. The road to true inclusion in the workplace is still long. At the same time, a wave of retreat from diversity initiatives is sweeping across corporate America with the start of Trump's presidency. From Ford scaling back on its diversity efforts to Disney cutting a transgender-themed scene, what does this mean for the future of inclusion, and what lessons can we take away from the shifts? In today's special edition of our Suits and Sneakers podcast, we explore the current DE&I status quo in the workplace in Germany, Europe, India, and the world. Hi, my name is Harald Fortmann, and I welcome my co-host, Joy Edwin Thanarajah.
Hello from my side as well. We would like to welcome you to a special episode of Suits and Sneakers about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Regular listeners of our Suits and Sneakers podcast will likely notice this episode is different. For one, today's episode is entirely in English, and for another, we are joined by not just one, but two amazing guests. We are extremely pleased that our first guest is here with us today. She is an inspiring leader with over 2 decades of experience in innovation and marketing. In her current role as Vice President of DE&I, Talent Acquisition and Employer Branding at Beiersdorf, our guest is passionately driving the vision of shaping future through inclusion. Welcome, Misel, to the podcast Suits and Sneakers.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're also happy that we are getting support from our own ranks in this episode. Our second guest leads Deininger's consumer and retail practice in India and in the Middle East, bringing with her extensive experience in the executive search and leadership consulting industry. In her work, she specializes in DE&I and is the author of Deininger's recently published DE&I report, Inclusion or Illusion, Decoding the DE&I Paradox in India. Welcome, dear Angela, to the podcast Suits and Sneakers.
Thank you, everyone.
Misel, you have extensive experience in the area of diversity and inclusion as Vice President of DE&I, Talent Acquisition and Employer Branding at Beiersdorf. You are without doubt and several awarded DE&I expert, no passionate. Can you start by giving us an overview of what DE&I entails and how you at Beiersdorf put the topic into practice?
Yes, with pleasure. From our perspective, DE&I really refers to our commitment to build an environment within Beiersdorf that is truly representative of the diversity of our global consumer base, set an environment where everyone can be their true self so that we can leverage everyone's individual strengths and really dismantle any type of barrier that is in place that it kind of prevents the equitable rise of our employees and leaders. And so, our commitment to creating an environment where everyone can thrive, irrespective of their background, who they love, where they're from, the way they think, the different abilities they might have. So this is, in a nutshell, what DE&I is for us.
Angela, you and our team at Deininger India and Middle East have just published an extensive report of diversity inclusion in the corporate sector in India. What motivated you to start the report, and what findings did you personally find the most important?
Thank you, Joy. I think one major thing that drove us was India is such a special economy. We're growing, we're diverse. We're sort of trying to go forward in a lot of spheres. And to be able to do that, I realized we have to build a very strong corporate sector. And one of the key aspects that plays an important role in sustainable growth has been talent. How do you bring in talent? How do you look at talent? How do you engage with talent? And in a culture and in an economy which is so diverse, if you don't talk about diversity and if you don't include inclusion as a part of your talent strategy, one may fall behind. And it was interesting to sort of talk to people in the corporate sector, CEOs, CHROs, some very senior D&I leads, and understand what is the current tapestry in the corporate sector. That was perhaps the primary driver for us. And I must admit, quite a few interesting insights, some encouraging and a few sort of confusing. That sort of paves way to say maybe there is a long journey or perhaps an evolving journey. What one must understand is, small or big, everyone sort of started that journey and everyone's at a different stage. And that was an interesting insight altogether. But maybe what was important to note was about a third of people who thought inclusion is a part of their culture did not really differentiate between diversity and inclusion. Now, that was interesting to know because people sort of end up looking at both these concepts interchangeably. And I think that's the journey that we wanted to sort of unravel, diversity to inclusion. It was also very interesting to note a lot of focus goes into leadership. 85% of CEOs thought that if you had inclusive and rather diverse teams, there is notable difference in business performance. And everyone thought that not just business performance, but a lot of topics around efficiency, effectiveness, engagement sort of go higher. So I think many, but two of those sort of stood out for me.
I must admit that I was very surprised about the results. And I always thought that India is a lot more further with especially diversity. I never thought about inclusion in India, to be honest, but about diversity because, you have so many women in leadership roles or also in politics. So it was really very interesting. Misel, what do you think about those results and how would you compare them to Germany and from your experience in India with Beiersdorf?
First of all, I love the title, Inclusion or Illusion, how very, very accurate that title is given the current political landscape and dialogue. Now, I must say that it's really, really interesting to see how similar your insights are to the experiences that I have had both in Beiersdorf and beyond. I mean, first of all, you mentioned around how everyone is on a different stage of the journey. And this was also a big insight for us as a company trying to accelerate this agenda. Because, it is important that we meet the people where they are because they will not jump that gap themselves, right? And so this is really important to respect where people are and how quickly are they going, right? Some people, we have employees that are very advanced and they'd like to accelerate even more. We have employees that are right at the beginning, not knowing what the role is that they can play, but they're willing to be participating in the journey. And we have people that are skeptical. And so it's important that we meet everyone where they are. And so that is really interesting. The second point you mentioned around, diversity versus inclusion, super critical because, it's important for us. We actually focus much more on inclusion than on diversity. Diversity is important for us because we want to ensure representation. But actually, without inclusion, diversity does not have the impact we're looking for. And so we focus really on driving a culture of inclusion where people feel safe, where people feel recognized, valued, and so they can contribute to their full potential, so to say. And then, of course, your point around the impact on business. Angela, this is now particularly relevant if you think about the discourse that is driven predominantly right now in the US about DE&I hires, right? I mean, the reason why we as Beiersdorf are so committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion is because we are seeing the benefits on the organization, on the results, on the innovation, on the decision making. We're doing this because not only is it the right thing to do, we know it is the right thing to do as well from a business perspective. And this is really super critical for me, especially right now, I mean, diverse teams operating in inclusive environments, they are they're high-performing teams. I mean, it's an essential ingredient of a high-performing team. And we are seeing the results in Beiersdorf, and that's why we remain committed to it. And and then finally, your point around engagement is, we have stories of of employees who now feel they can be their true selves, who were wasting energy hiding their identity because they weren't feeling safe. And now that energy can be converted into something which has a strong contribution to the business. So I must say, fully aligned, Angela, with everything you were saying. Yeah.
Our Deininger DE&I report showed that the majority of organizations in India are in an accepting and an evolving phase in their DE&I journey with formal policies in place. So a global study by Indeed also found that 63% of employees in India see positive diversity efforts at their workplace. So the highest value in international comparison. In Germany, only 36% of employees rate their employers' diversity efforts positively. So why do you think there is such a big difference between the two countries?
Yeah, I find that really interesting, I must say, although not necessarily surprising. If I think about India, I mean, India is such a vibrantly diverse country when it comes to, ethnicities, when it comes to religion, to food, to cultural celebration. So I think it is perhaps very much embedded and woven into the DNA of India. And perhaps in Germany, it is not as strongly woven into the DNA of the country. It's probably a little bit more homogeneous when we think about those elements. And therefore, I think there is more of a journey that German society as well as German corporations need to go on to make the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion understood and felt, because I think it's a longer journey. And what I found interesting in your report as well, Angela, is how much endorsement you get from the leaders, right? And this is super critical. You cannot move the needle unless the leaders are fully behind it. And I think here as well, it's perhaps, if I think about the state of many of the German companies, that this is perhaps also a journey where people are starting at a slightly different point on the journey. Not to say they're not willing, but they're maybe starting a little bit more from a different angle.
Would you agree, Angela, that in the discussions you had with those leaders that you felt it's not just a checkbox they have, to check because it's kind of on their OKRs or whatever, but it's really kind of even passion or, necessity they're identified because of what Misel just said, that it has an economic impact on their company?
I must say, Harald, it's been a mixed bag. For some, unfortunately, or rather, not unfortunately, for some, it's still the beginning of the journey, and a lot of it is therefore driven by the global HQ or the group HQ, where you have a target on diversity that you have to meet. And unfortunately, a lot of those targets are still skewed towards gender representation of women and not really including other diverse groups. But for a lot of others evolving organizations, some have moved beyond that to say, okay, while we have representation, or, if I sort of take a step back and say, they're moving from acceptance to really looking at celebrating diversity. To say, can we create a space, and like Misel said, where people feel safe, people can come and share their views. They would really be considered, integrated in decision-making process. And it's a journey. And unless people sort of drive it top down, that's not happened. It's a constant change. I keep telling people that, till that really happens, we have to talk about it daily. And we have to really integrate that in our business cycles. And someone from the top has to act as an influencer and show results and really measure that business impact. And to your point, is there an economic metric around it? A lot of people have come in and done that measurement, but that pool is perhaps smaller than the majority, which is still sort of driving through the initial representation phase, or rather trying to unravel the journey from D to I, so to say.
We have seen a lot of studies, McKinsey and anybody else made studies on the impact, but what I missed on all those studies is that they kind of looked at the economical impact and how, it's better for the company and so on. But I mean, it's so easy because I think people feel safer, people feel like included and, have a great culture, which automatically drives passion and drives business. Isn't it like that way? So it's actually, we don't need a study. It's normal life, isn't it?
Yeah. Correct. Exactly. You have someone come in, be a part of your organization. Don't perhaps look at them by the definitions that have traditionally held their definition, but really look at them through their experience, to their input, through their impact. And I know it's a journey. There is another topic, and perhaps a topic for another day, where we really talk about, do people with less opportunities, do they even reach that position? And therefore, it's a journey that has to start right from the beginning, where people are given those opportunities. But at that point where they're already a part of your organization, don't have them because it's the right thing to have them as a part of the team, and give them the space to really impact the business.
Can I maybe add to that and build on that a little bit? Because what I think is very interesting, Harald, when you're saying, isn't it so logical that when you build spaces where people feel safe and they feel recognized and acknowledged, that, that people would embrace? I think what's really interesting from our perspective as we've went on this, on this road, is that very often DE&I is seen as a zero-sum game. And there is this perception that when we are talking about certain, maybe marginalized or underrepresented groups, that the majority feel somehow that they are not part of the conversation, that they're benefiting from this change. And this is something that we have really tried to change in Beiersdorf, to make sure that everyone feels part of this movement and that everyone understands that we're all winning when we are creating more, diverse teams and have a more inclusive organization. Everyone will win in this way. But that is also something which is not necessarily always the standard starting point, so to say. So it really requires a lot of dialogue, I must say, and a lot of making sure that everyone feels heard, including those that perhaps are in the majority group, so to say,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Misel. So let me bring a little bit reality into the discussion, because it's, for me, too romantic, too theoretical. But end of the day, what is the purpose of a company? That sounds like a social responsibility, what you're talking about. So at what time I can say I have to take my social responsibility, I mean, I as CEO, as a shareholder. We are talking about Beiersdorf, man, it's a big company. It's a really big employer branding. But what about the typical Mittelstand in Germany with 300, 400 people? So it's the same question. So do you, Angela, have any experience out of the report that you also interview someone who has only 300 or 400 employees? And what about the importance of this thematic for CEOs like companies with 200, 300?
It's interesting you say that, Joy, and obviously, larger organizations pave that example, and you're right in that they have to sort of set an example, influence the world. But so you must remember, India is also a land of many, many startups and the entrepreneurial world. And you would listen to so many founders who would look at talent very differently, because they realize they need those younger future leaders to be a part of that journey. And if you don't talk about aspects of inclusion, then you will end up losing them. So for them, talent is equally proportionate, or rather retaining good talent and having focus on the right topics is equally proportionate to their business. And a lot of even mid-level or mid-sized companies did say there is a huge impact in bottom line when they see that change happening internally. But having said that, Joy, is that a very large proportion? No, because unfortunately, when you're talking about business, and you're absolutely right, when you're starting up, when you're smaller, you start with business. Where is your revenue? Where are your numbers? And then you sort of start realizing, there's the talent that is sort of driving it. And right now, perhaps I need to focus on that. But then you start unraveling how can I become better, because there are so many of those small organizations. And then one of the pivot points seem to be talent and an inclusive talent culture in general.
Thank you.
We see a lot of movement actually going on in Germany right now. So, which actually led us to open up an office in the US just this week, because a lot of the Mittelstand or the higher Mittelstand is making their way to the US because of the tariff shock by Trump, and say, okay, we need to have a plant over there and work there. Would you see, and I mean, in general, the US has traditionally a strong influence on the entire global economy still, even if China and India are getting better and better. Would you see that US anti-woke trend coming over or influencing also German or international companies, or do you think they're going to stand with their values and their positions here?
From my perspective, this is where, the whole topic of inclusion versus illusion really bears out, right? Because, we are sticking with DE&I because we really believe it has a very strong influence on our ability to be competitive. And that is competitive in terms of attracting the right and the best talent to the organization, particularly because there's a talent shortage wherever you look, but also in terms of ensuring that we can best meet the needs of our consumers. And our consumers are also diverse, right? So whether we're talking about companies that have 10 or 200 or 20,000 or 100,000 employees, their consumer base is diverse. And it's important as a result that to best meet that consumer base, they understand the positive impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do believe that there's many companies that we've heard in the media in the last few weeks as a result of the Trump administration that they have downgraded their DE&I efforts or have stopped their DE&I efforts, or at least are no longer communicating their DE&I efforts. At the same time, there's also a lot of companies actually that, as you mentioned earlier, Harald, that have come out and stood strong in the wake of this dialogue. I think that in general, companies that have committed to DE&I, and understand the impact it has on the organization and the business results and their consumers, that they will remain committed because the impact is there. And if people are easy to now take this political climate as an excuse to stop it, quite frankly, it was an illusion to begin with, from my perspective.
Yeah, but still, I mean, would you agree with me that some of the employees are scared right now because they don't know, is that going to still be a safe place to work?
I think it is very unclear right now. If I have to just call it as it is, I think it's as unclear for us as for employees. I think they would look for direction, but they know that most of these companies, unfortunately, are either pushed to a corner or assume that they are pushed to a corner, and they have to take those stands. But I feel like Misel said, if they are truly committed to this, and if they really feel that the employees internally need that space and they really add value, I think they would sort of come over it, but not all of them. But for now, for me, from where I see it, it's slightly unclear for me of what's going to unravel in the US and the companies there.
So you are both strongly committed to DE&I and your day-to-day work. So why should companies stick to DE&I efforts despite the anti-woke trend? Misel?
Well, they should stick to it because, it pays off from a business perspective. And it makes the organization a great place to work. I mean, ultimately, when you bring in people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives, it enriches your teams. It enriches your workplace. It makes it a much greater place to be for everyone. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to agree on everything, right? I mean, the whole point of building an inclusive environment is that you basically nurture the ability to have constructive dialogue also when you have very different opinions. I mean, this ultimately is what helps drive stronger decision making and more innovation, right? When people that come with different perspectives can constructively collaborate for a better outcome. And I actually think that when companies are able in this uncertain times, with so much pushback, actually really nurture the ability to build constructive dialogues within their organization where, people can work together in a respectful manner, it will have a really positive impact on the organization. I mean, Beiersdorf, since we have really accelerated the DE&I agenda, we also have record-breaking results. We are, for the third year running, the fastest growing beauty company. We are doing super, super well from a business perspective. And we also have super high engagement scores. So they go up, they are above benchmark, they increase year on year. All the facts that we have when we look at the impact of driving this agenda are positive on the people and on the business, and so stick with it. It's good. It's really the right thing to do.
When I hear this, I think, as soon as you have experienced, that diversity and this kind of, way of working, I think you're going to stick to it. So perhaps, I see it as so normal because, I grew up most of my time in an international school as our kids do. And, you're surrounded by different people and you're like, it's normal for you. And I think, probably we need more companies just trying it out and saying, okay, let's do it. Let's get more involved in that. I don't know, Angela, if you had some thought about that and on the discussions you had for the report, if you saw companies saying, yeah, we struggle yet, but we really want to do that because we think it's going to change, our culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Harald. I think a lot of people talk about it, especially, when you meet them, they identify the fact that the business cycles have become so much shorter. And what worked perhaps 2 years ago is not working anymore. And if the change is being led by the same group of people who know the same things, then you're not going to change the outcome. And therefore, it is so important to bring in people who would help you unlearn, relearn, like Misel said, have that constructive dialogue. And I think people are looking at it in a different way to say, perhaps it needs to be a part of my organizational identity if I need to build a sustainable business. And of course, everyone sort of trying to dabble into that idea and understand how can that really happen. But I think people are talking about it with a lot of importance this time around because, if you were to look at 2020 and 3 years hence, unfortunately, everything that we learned before that, nothing really helped us. But if there were people who were ready to think differently, and all of us are sort of shaped up through our experiences, our background, and like you said, school, social system, our upbringing, our ethnicity, and that sort of also helps us to think differently. And when all of that comes together, I think fresh thinking, fresh ideas, innovation sort of comes in.
But you have to hear also, Harald, that not anyone is growing up in an international environment like me, for example. So I grew up in a city with 53,000 people in the middle of Germany. And even I think this subject, what we're talking about, is a privileged subject especially for the urbanizations. It makes more sense, I think. And also companies like Beiersdorf, Misel, because you are a B2C producer. So I think you have another motivation also to improve this subject. But today, we are living in 2025 in a developed country like Germany, and even you introduce my name with Thanarajah, they will start to talk to you with English because they can't imagine that I can also speak German. That's the one thing. And another thing is also the hidden champion, one of my clients, is calling me during I'm driving back to the office and say, I hope you understand my message also between the lines. And I don't know what you want to say me. Said, we need a man as a CEO. So, and that's also the true. And end of the day, that is, I think that the first level of diversity to talk about. Okay, I said, at end of the day, sir, you need the best personality, and maybe it could be also female. He said, no. For our culture, we want to have a man. So in this case, this is another side of the medal. And so my question to you, Misel and Angela, what you're thinking. Is it an advantage situation in which you are to talk about this kind of subjects? And what you're thinking about the future to tier ones, to suppliers, companies, who's also the hidden champions. Are there any advantages with the urbanizations? Misel.
I mean, you raise a really valid side of this debate, right? And I think that in general, this is why we talk a lot about the importance of representation. I mean, the only reason, why anyone would believe that you can only have, let's say, a male CEO or any type of CEO is because, there is a lack of representation. I mean, you can't sort of see what you can't be, and you can't be what you can't see, and you are also very unlikely to make a decision of appointing someone in a certain position if that just is not at all representative. So I think it starts really with the importance of representation, and that goes across the board. And that also goes for everyone across the entire value chain. So, as a company, even though we are a big company, but we work with across our value chain with also many smaller companies. And we also have, responsibility to our investors, our shareholders. And across that entire value chain, this conversation is critical. And we are also, as a company, having dialogues with our smaller suppliers around the importance of representation. We are also getting from investors and auditors questions and challenges on our commitment in this space. So, from my perspective, you can't escape it, right? And there's also no need to escape it, because actually, when you lean into it, you will see the benefits from it. And I think one important learning for us is that it is, however, very uncomfortable in the beginning. When you bring diversity in, it's super uncomfortable, right? Because when you're used to, lots of the same people around the table always agreeing and saying yes, and then this one person goes, oh, hold on, I have a completely different perspective, and everyone goes, oh God, there you go again with this, didn't we all agree we would move forward? And, so it is actually uncomfortable in the beginning, right? So we're going to have to push through this with intention, because initially it doesn't look like there are benefits. Initially, you feel it's slowing us down. It's creating tension, frustration, conflict, you name it. And you're not seeing the benefits straight away. So, you have to really be super intentional. You have to really believe in it, because otherwise you're not moving through that discomfort, right? But I think we all should, because you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
Joy, yeah.
Completely agree with Misel, and Joy agree that sometimes it seems a lot of these things are being driven by people who come from a place of privilege. But unfortunately, I think that's how it's going to make a difference. People with privilege have to drive that. And I sort of completely believe that representation is the first step. If it's like a habit that has to be formed. I in fact had one of my participants say something very interesting, and I quote, he said, D&I evolution needs more success stories, more champions, and more opinion leaders. Until you have that, you can't evolve. And I completely agree with that. And it is difficult. Once tier 2, tier 3, I think it's a phased approach. I think it will happen, but somebody would have to lead. And sometimes it will be the person who comes from a place of privilege, because otherwise nobody else would follow. And the other thing that would probably help is consistency, to consistently do this, even if it, like Misel said, even if it makes you uncomfortable at the beginning, make sure it's consistent. I think maybe that would help.
Not maybe. We are very proud that you are in our team, Angela, for this message. Thank you.
And me too.
Actually, Joy and I rarely disagree, but my answer to his question would be, once upon a time there were dinosaurs. And what happened to them, so we'll see what happens here.
Yeah. Harald, I hope we don't die before these dinosaurs, because they are now 80 plus and they are living on more.
Yeah, we're going to outlive them, I'm sure. But looking at recruiting now, because, exactly, you have to do the effort. And we saw that 2/3 of the respondents of the DE&I report in India said that unconscious bias is the biggest barrier to inclusion in India. According to a recent study by Indeed, it's also the same problem in Germany. So, and Misel, we saw that recently you even did a training on that on LinkedIn. And I'm sure that was nothing new for you. But how would you say that, strategies about recognizing and combating this unconscious bias is helping for those companies who are involving in the sector?
Yeah, so from a recruitment perspective, unconscious bias, everyone has it. So first of all, it's about just acknowledging that you have unconscious biases, right? Which is not always easy to do. And interestingly, particularly for the people that feel that they are very advanced in the space of DE&I, they actually often think they don't have it. They don't have them anymore. But we talk about the importance of uncovering your biases because it's leading to, decision making that's impacting people. And so we really do quite a lot of effort around upskilling our people leaders, particularly, so who make people decisions, around the importance of acknowledging your bias. And talking about sort of, like flipping the question. But we also spend a lot of time embedding, I would say, systemic change, because ultimately we can't rely on people, so to say, to have the right intent that leads to the right impact. Actually, for us, it's really about how can we eliminate the bias out of the system altogether by really implementing an inclusive recruitment approach, and a process. So we work on that a lot to make sure that we not only attract all the talents that we need, but that we also ensure that there are we're eliminating some of the barriers within the process, and then we ensure, hopefully, that in the organization the retention is high and the progress is sort of equitable. So we try and eliminate bias as much as possible through systemic change, whilst at the same time, of course, spending time upskilling our people about the importance of acknowledging the fact that you have unconscious bias and that it's having an impact on your decision making, and it's important to try and eliminate that.
Mm-hmm. May I?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
Sorry. So I was so shy, that's why. So how can a company make sure to include diverse group like LGBTQIA and persons with disabilities into their DE&I initiatives? For one example from our sides, Harald maybe know this employee also. I think around about 10 years ago, there was a discussion for one of our employees to start there because he is a little bit handicapped. Okay. In German, you have really strong labor law, Misel. So the best labor law on the world, you have it in Germany. So, and my HR told me, do you remember you can't quit him with normal time? So recognize. I said, okay, but we want this person because he speaks fluently Chinese, he studies sinology, but I love his personality, so I want him. And so I had a discussion with HR. With this point of view, don't forget how really difficult to quit him if you are not satisfied with him. And said I think that's not the right mindset to talk about now in this situation about the quit, how we can quit and what right I have as an employer. Today, I can say proudly he is now, this year, he will make his 10th anniversary, and he is not replaceable for me because not only for the Chinese skills, especially for his mindset. And so this is one of our own experience. As you see, there is a development, there is a practical results of a good example also. But back to my question. So what do you think about how can we make sure that they include diverse group like LGBTQ into their DE&I initiatives, Misel?
This is such an interesting question and an example, because for me, it goes right back to the discussion that's currently happening. The narrative that in order to embrace DE&I as an organization, we have to compromise on standards or performance, right? The whole point about DE&I is actually it enables you to attract a much bigger group of talents, which means that you are able to raise the bar on qualifications, and therefore you can really, truly attract the best talent that's out there. And that is a really important point for us to make, because it is one of the, I would say, most pervasive myths in the space of DE&I, that in order to accelerate DE&I, you are compromising on capabilities and performance. It's not the case. We say we hire for the ability, because we have a huge ambition as a company. We want to be the best skincare company in the world. We're competing with the likes of L'Oreal, Unilever, Henkel, P&G, you name it, Estée Lauder. Why in the hell would we compromise on performance? We don't want to compromise on performance because we really have a super big ambition. What we want to do is make sure that our company is seen as the best employer of choice for the best talent out there. And that talent is diverse. And so when we speak to all talents and we are intentional about reaching out to all talents group, it means that we have basically the best possible pick. And that includes, when it comes to talents from the LGBTIQ plus community, talent that have disabilities, different people from different backgrounds, races, etc., you name it. And does that mean that we have to make sure that we adapt our recruitment process to make sure that there are no barriers or biases embedded which actually negatively impact certain groups? Yes, it does, because we want to make sure that everyone has an equitable playing field, so their capabilities are shown in the best way possible. But that for me is the biggest point. DE&I actually means you're raising the bar because you are attracting a bigger pool of talents.
So perhaps we can add some, golden rules for those who would like to try and would like to do more. So can you give some strategies you would recommend to managers to promote D&I in the company and their own team? Perhaps we start with Angela.
I would see it as a triangle. Leadership,
okay. Mm-hmm.
Leadership has to drive it and manage change management. Culture has to change. It has to be ingrained inside the culture, and it's perhaps connected to point number one, that it perhaps has to be driven at an organizational culture level. And there have to be policies that sort of support them, because that's how you start. Till it becomes second nature, you need a rule book, you need a framework to work with. So for me, perhaps those, and across all this, consistency to make sure this happens till it becomes a habit.
Mm-hmm. Can you add something, Misel?
Yeah, so fully agree. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, Angela. And then 2 points that I would add based on our own experience is, first of all, I would say, really collaborate with external partners and experts, right? So it was very clear when we started this journey that we did not have all the expertise inside the organization, and we needed to partner with external experts to make sure that we're doing the right thing, right? And that we focused on sort of those areas where we could make the biggest impact. And secondly, I would add, really, leverage your own people. I mean, I would say that the grassroots communities or the ERGs that we have in Beiersdorf that are representing, the LGBTIQ community. We have an ERG for people with disabilities and allies. We have an international ERG. We have one for all the generations, you name it. And the strength of, them uniting their voices and identifying what it is that we as a company need to do in that space is really tremendous. So I would say there is so much passion and motivation within your own organization. Really leverage and unlock that, because the impact of that is pretty impressive, but it also means that you're very authentic as an organization, because it means you're driving this movement from the inside out. And I think that is a requirement for it not to be an illusion, but true inclusion, so to say.
I also think that, we kind of have to think about the wording. And I remember very well an event at Snapchat where my friend Götz invited me. And there was, I don't know if you know her, Jeanette Burke. And Jeanette Burke, I don't know exactly how you would say that in English, but it's a person of small stature. But actually, she's on the board at Prada as well. And Prada designs clothes just for her, which I found already very exciting. And she was, starting her discussion with, I'm a disabled person. No, what kind of person are you? So how would you call yourself? And everybody was like, looking down, and she was like, yo, don't be shy. Tell the word. And everybody was looking down again. And then one said, normal. And she said, exactly. And that was, for me, that was really mind-blowing, because I never thought about that. But yeah, we are normal, and those people are not normal, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. And actually they're special because they have a lot of, things we can't see, hear, do. So, and we don't embrace that. So I think wording is also something we have to overthink when we talk to, our people and to clients and to customers or whatever. So I think that is always something people don't really look at, how they word, those efforts. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes, I think, but on the other hand, I would say, because I think inclusive language is super important, right? Because, why would you use language that somehow is harmful to another person or maybe undermines their identity? At the same time, I think it's also really important that people don't feel that we are policing everything that's being said, because this means that people reject very often. In Germany, the whole topic around gendering, so, it's so polarizing, when actually it's more about, it's not about sort of focusing what you cannot say. It's about focusing what you can say, and trying not to harm another person with your words. But I find language indeed very powerful in this space as well. Absolutely, yeah.
I can remember a few years ago, we have privilege to meet the monk Anselm Grün. He said, and the conclusion of the 2 days retreat with him was, Harald, using language as a house where the other people around you are feeling well inside. And I think this is I think this was one of the good messages that I take with us. But not only for the diversity, also for to run a company, to have the culture in the company, and more or lesser you smaller you are, so more important are your language, because that's the bridge to the people. And that's also, I think, it's a challenging time now, Misel, and it's a rough time. It's I think 20 years ago, the information transportation was more slowlier. Now we have a lot of information. We have to react as possible to those times. We have to finish the report and send it to the post to the customer, and then he get it after 2-3 days, the candidate report. Today they will get it in a few seconds, and in 5 minutes you will answer it's the right candidate or not the right candidate. So I think that's a challenging time. So, but it's really important thing what Harald say. It's all about also the language.
Just as a closing question, because we have unfortunately come to our end, is, we talked about diversity and inclusion, benefits and challenges in that area. But for you, Misel, who has been working for years in that sector, and I think I already know the answer, but, what motivates you personally every day to do that path and, encourage Beiersdorf to continue on that?
Many things. However, I would say, I really believe that every person, has something wonderful to contribute to the world, yeah, wherever that may be, inside a company, personally, wherever that may be. I really believe that creating an inclusive environment unleashes that potential in the best possible way. I just find it really, really sad, when people can't fully thrive because they're hiding part of their identity. I love it when you see people grow and flourish because they are in a safe space, they feel recognized, they feel seen, and, they are inspired to do their best. It's really a wonderful thing, and I love it every single day, because there are so many examples of that happening when you are driving towards a more inclusive organization, And so this is what motivates me, to create
Very
a little
nice.
bit of tiny bit of positive impact.
Yeah, very nice. I also remember our podcast with Axinia Star, Joy, who also said that polymath types who are, hyper intelligent are hiding because they don't feel included. So you see, it has a lot of different angles to look at. And yeah, for you, Angela, some closing words on what motivates you to do. I mean, why did you do that report, and why are you keeping that up?
Sure, I think I'm trying to do my bit. I feel it's sometimes it's slightly
quite a lot,
personal for me. If I were to be really honest, I hope I live to see that day when we stop looking at people through their description. The titles don't define them, but their capability and their mindset really defines their performance. And I think it sort of comes from many different things. Unfortunately, at some point, what I represent was a diverse category. Used to be, and is perhaps in many places. In the industry that I work for, such scintillating conversations around talent, people, and aspirations and ambitions. And I feel that there needs to be a point where we stop looking at descriptions as derailers. They're just descriptions. If you're brown, you're just brown. If you're short, you're just short. That doesn't define your capability or your intent or your performance. And I think maybe trying to move the needle towards that slightly more keeps me motivated.
Very nice.
Sounds like I have a dream.
Yeah, I do. Maybe I'll write it.
We hope. It sounds fun, but at the end of the day, if you're looking back in the history where they are, those times with the I have a dream, and looking today, what kind of things we are discussing today, we could be thankful for the situation now in which civilization we are, but don't give up and fight more for diversity and more freedom. So thank you both, Misel and Angela, for this truly inspirational conversation about diversity and inclusion in India, Germany, and worldwide.
Thank you so much. It was super interesting engaging in this dialogue all together with you. So it was a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you, Joy, Harald, and Misel. Really, this was amazing. I enjoyed a lot.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as we did, you can find all episodes of the Suits and Sneakers podcast, the other episodes in German, on Deininger's website and obviously on your favorite podcast platform, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. We highly encourage you to discuss your thoughts about this episode and your view on DE&I on LinkedIn. So you're going to see some posts going around that. You can find all the links in the show notes as usual. And thank you for listening. Take care and see you the next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.